Hey guys, it's your host Brianna Davis, and welcome back to episode 2 of Prison Unwrapped. This week on Prison Unwrapped, I'm going to give you guys a few updates on what's going on in our nation's correctional facilities when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as break down the school-to-prison pipeline. The school-to-prison pipeline is something I'm really passionate about. I told you all last week that I'm getting my master's in liberal studies at Arizona State University, and this is something that we touched on in one of my crimes and punishments classes within the semester, and I was just appalled by how broken our system is and how many children are subjected to it. So I'm just going to give you guys a quick update with what's going on with COVID-19 and incarcerated individuals, just because I said I would do it last week, and this is still super important and still affecting the lives of those behind bars. Nearly 400 incarcerated individuals, parolees, and employees within the State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision have tested positive for coronavirus. This department in particular oversees New York's parole system as well as 52 state prisons. Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, and someone you've probably seen on the news a whole lot lately, was asked whether or not he would release individuals from state prisons to slow the spread of the virus, and he has yet to make a decision. The State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision have implemented measures to combat the spread of COVID-19. The new policies include suspending visitation, limiting inmate transfers, and allowing staff to wear personal protective equipment. I'm really hoping that Governor Cuomo does the right thing and starts releasing prisoners from these correctional facilities, just because a lot more people are going to die if we don't combat this virus right now. We can't afford to have employees getting sick and spreading the virus, as well as inmates spreading the virus within their cells and lunch tables, things like that. It's just very important that we combat this now, and I hope he does the right thing and lets these prisoners go. That's a quick update from me about the COVID-19 virus, and just keep yourselves educated and woke about this issue. Because like I said last episode, incarcerated individuals are the last ones people think about when they really shouldn't. And we should really be paying attention to these people because not all of them have a voice. Think about their families, their friends. Like I said, not everyone that goes away is a bad person. A lot of these people just want to get better, and we have to do better as a society and bring these issues to light. All right, so now let's jump into what the bulk of this episode is going to be about, and that's the school to prison pipeline. If you don't know what the school to prison pipeline is, totally okay. Let me educate you. The school to prison pipeline is when children are funneled from public schools into juvenile correctional facilities at a young age. Many of the children that are victims of the school to prison pipeline have histories of poverty, learning disabilities, and are often neglected. These kids would benefit from educational and counseling services, but instead are isolated, punished, and pushed out. There are many factors to why the school to prison pipeline is so successful, so let me break them down for you. For most students, the pipeline begins with inadequate resources in public schools. I'm talking about overcrowded classrooms, lack of qualified teachers, and insufficient funds for extras. Extras meaning guidance counselors, special education services, and in some cases, even textbooks. These students are already being locked in these second-rate educational environments. Because these schools already lack resources and are facing incentives to push out low-performing students, these schools have embraced zero-tolerance disciplinary policies. Zero-tolerance policies impose severe punishments no matter what the circumstance. For example, students have been expelled for bringing nail clippers or scissors to school, and rates of suspension have dramatically increased in recent years, from 1.7 million in 1974 to about 3.1 million in 2000. And these numbers are the most dramatic for children of color. African American students are 3.5 times more likely to be expelled or suspended than their white peers. Black children constitute about 18% of students, but they account for more than 46% of those suspended more than once. Those students with disabilities face the same kind of hardships. While 8.6% of school children identify with having a disability that affects the way they learn, these students make up 32% of the youth juvenile centers in our nation. About 1 in 4 Black children with disabilities were suspended at least once, versus 1 in 11 white students. The problem with the suspended and expelled children is they're left unsupervised and they have no constructive activities to work on. They can also easily fall behind on their coursework, and that just leads to more and more dropouts. And all of these factors increase the likelihood of court involvement. Schools are increasingly bypassing and neglecting due process protections for their students. A lot of these schools become pipeline gateways just because they're not relying on the teachers and the administration to enforce disciplinary measures, but instead actual police officers. A growing number of districts employ school resource officers to patrol the hallways, often with little or no training with how to deal with youth disciplinary measures. Students are more likely to be subjected to school-based arrests. And majority of these arrests are non-violent, mostly disruptive behavior. The rise in school-based arrests are the quickest way from the schoolhouse to the jailhouse. Let's jump to disciplinary alternative schools. I know growing up, I had one in my school district, and I really had no idea what it was all about. All I knew was the bad kids, the ones that couldn't really, sit in the classroom and do their work, had to go to these alternative schools. Well, the reality of these schools is they're not really helping anyone, but not only punishing the children, but just forcing them to be further isolated from their peers. In some jurisdictions, students that are expelled or suspended give up their right for education. In others, they're sent to these disciplinary alternative schools. These schools are growing rapidly across the nation and are immune to the educational standards of, say, a regular high school in your school district. A lot of these schools fail to provide meaningful education services to these troubled youth and instead make them just fall back further and further, so when they do go back to their regular institutions, they aren't caught up, they don't know what's going on, and that just causes more stress and anxiety for the child. Those students that find themselves being pushed down the pipeline eventually end up in juvenile detention centers, many of those that provide few to no educational resources. Most of the students that find themselves in this part of the pipeline are students of color. Students of color are far more likely than their white peers to be suspended, expelled, and arrested for the same exact conduct at school. And those with disabilities are particularly more likely to travel down this part of the pipeline as well. And it's almost impossible for these students that are already this far down the pipeline to go in reverse, to go back to school. There are a lot of barriers that they face, and there's just a lot of prevention from getting better. The number of school resource officers rose 38% between the years of 1997 to 2007. One 2005 study found that students are more likely to be arrested at school now than they were a generation ago. Now that we've gone over some of the factors, let's find some solutions. Solutions, I think, give people hope. Finding a way to combat this within our public school system, as well as being aware of it, are just super, super important. So one of the first things that we can do, instead of pushing children out to these juvenile correctional facilities, these teachers need a lot more support and training when it comes to effective disciplinary measures. These schools need to use best practices and behavior modification in order to keep these kids in school where they belong, not behind jail cells. Police should be a last resort, not a first response, especially when dealing with children. There needs to be limits for the amount of law enforcement used in public schools. I also believe that we need to really take steps to ending zero tolerance disciplinary policies. Suspensions and expulsions are used to punish students of color at such a higher rate than their white counterparts. So instead of using those types of disciplinary measures, we must provide counseling services. We must provide additional educational services for those in public schools. We also need to invest in supportive programs. Like I said, we need more mental health professionals readily available to talk to these students, guidance counselors, mentors, people that students can talk to, feel comfortable with, and understand what's going on, understand how can they work through these issues. The school to prison pipeline costs $746 million a year to criminalize students just in New York City. There should be no reason that they can't afford textbooks in their public schools or any sort of extracurricular activities. Students thrive when they have things to do, constructive activities. And I believe that if we just invest in their opportunities rather than spending so much money on criminalizing young children, but investing in their education, we can stop this pipeline. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of Prison Unwrapped. This is probably one of the more heavier and bulkier episodes, but definitely super important. I'm very passionate about the school to prison pipeline. I hope you guys learned something and you can educate yourself about how really toxic this pipeline is and how it directly funnels students straight to correctional facilities in our nation. Next week, I'm going to bring you guys some more updates about the COVID-19 situation, since that's a developing story in our correctional facilities. Next week's episode will be all about women in prison and just how that relates to pop culture and how we see women in prison. And so I'm really excited to talk about this. I know a lot of you probably have watched a lot of documentaries, really famous shows like Orange is the New Black, different shows about women in prison. And so I'm going to talk about that. If you guys have any comments, anything you'd like to share about this episode, if anything inspired you, or if you just want to learn more, please comment and let me know what you think. And I'd be happy to help answer any of your questions. Until next week, I'll see you guys next time on Prison Unwrapped.